On 8-9 October 2020, on the occasion of the Euidea Executive Board virtual meeting organized by the Sabancı University of Istanbul, it was taken stock of three work packages: Work Package 4, Work Package 5 and Work Package 6. In this framework, we have discussed about the single market, the economic and monetary union, Brexit and migration with Andreas, Research Fellow at the Jacques Delors Institute, Jan Bond, Director of Foreign Policy at the Center for European Reform, and Emmanuel, Comte, Senior Research Fellow at the Barcelona Center for International Affairs.
My name is Andreas Eisl. I'm a research fellow at the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris, and in the framework of the Euidea Horizon 2020 project, I'm looking in particular at external economic differentiation and their consequences for its effectiveness on the one hand and broader consequences for the EU's political unity. In the field of external economic differentiation, we basically look at different forms of third country access to the single market. Over the last 30 years, we have seen a huge growth of third countries seeking access to the common European market, and we have seen the development of a quite complex ecosystem of this external economic differentiation. And since we have now a certain time period, since different forms have been in place, we can actually now look at how well they have functions, what problems we can identify, looking on the one hand at attempts to renegotiate certain agreements, but also just interviewing key actors working on these issues. What we found in terms of problems is that particularly agreements that have a very static nature, they can lead to institutional drift, which means that over time, the existence of homogeneity between the single market itself and the access of third countries over time can become worse, basically. And so there is something that needs to be done about this. And on the other hand, we found that especially very complex institutional arrangements also can create problems because they provide for ambiguities and incoherences that can be used by different actors to not follow up on common obligations. And so what we found are key factors in ensuring effectiveness of different forms of external economic differentiation is that these agreements should be adaptable over time, that there should be the possibility of dynamic alignment to the evolving so-called EU acquis, that there will be a uniform interpretation and implementation of the commonly agreed rules, and that there is a uniform, simple and clear institutional framework in place to manage these agreements. What's also of key importance to ensure effectiveness over the long run is that these agreements should also be able to adapt to changes in objectives of these relationships between the EU and specific third countries, and regarding also the suitability of different of agreements in terms of specific country factors such as size, for example. And another key aspect, I think, which is important to mention is that it's very important to keep an adequate balance between the rights and obligations in terms of how much market access I get in exchange for which obligations I have to comply with to gain this market access. And never mind how strongly you're integrated, this balance needs to be ensured to have agreements that work over time, basically.
Is this differentiated approach working so far? Can we say that you, with this different kind of commercial agreements or different options to enter the single market, is performing well, and you see that is the path to go and to follow in the future?
Yeah, I think overall we can say when we're looking at the last 30 years that this has worked well overall. I think it's also almost a necessity to deal in a differentiated way with different countries. We have countries that are more or less close to the European Union, that are more or less developed, and that have more or less an objective to become EU member states in the future. And if we look at what happened to existing agreements, we have so far mainly seen either agreements remaining stable over time, meaning that they seem to work sufficiently well to ensure that they last, or if we look at agreements that have changed over time or that are currently renegotiated, they tend actually going more towards even closer integration, basically. So we cannot really see any centrifugal tendencies that certain countries are basically trying to abandon this approach. There is one exception, of course, which is the UK with Brexit, but it's coming from inside an EU member state, and we're going to see now which kind of future economic relationship as a third country the UK will have with the EU, and how this is going to evolve in the future. And I actually, even if we're now going to see a rather thin agreement, meaning not very deep market access in exchange for not very strong obligations, in the future we might see actually that the UK is going to go back on this and rather seek again a deeper market access, basically. But this is something that is a bit of prediction, but we cannot know this for sure, of course.
The paper that I've just published looks at external differentiation and Brexit in the specific context of foreign security and defense policy. And what we mean by that, some people would say external cooperation rather than differentiation, is the relationship between the EU and third countries, and the different ways in which different third countries relate to the EU. And so it looks at the examples of countries like Norway, which has a very informal relationship, Canada, which has a much more structured relationship with the EU. And it looks at what the British government is currently aiming at, which is no sort of formal relationship at all, but much more of a focus on bilateral foreign security and defense cooperation with individual member states or groups of member states after Brexit. And the paper looks at what is the most likely outcome at the moment, which seems to be, at least for the time being, no formal structures for cooperation, at the kind of much closer cooperation that the EU itself would like to see, and at the longer term possibility that there might be a kind of halfway house in which there would be some structural cooperation and some informal cooperation. But we haven't yet created the preconditions for that. The negotiations have not reached a stage where that is a foreseeable or likely outcome. And I think that perhaps the last point that I want to make about the paper is that having looked at the various different arrangements that third countries have, there is no real correlation between the extent to which you're willing to tie your own foreign policy to the foreign policy of the EU and the influence that you have over EU foreign policy. And that's perhaps somewhat different from cooperation in the economic area, where, for example, if you're a member of the European Economic Area, you get a role in decision shaping. Before the EU takes formal decisions on which you don't have a vote, you get to have a voice and to present your views to the Commission. And that's something which really doesn't exist in the foreign policy area so much. And I think that creates quite a lot of frustration among third countries, not just the UK, but the other third countries, who feel that they have good ideas or concrete capabilities to contribute to the EU's foreign policy effort, but are not really given the opportunity to influence EU policy making.
Do you think that Brexit could be for the European Union more an opportunity on foreign policy or a problem?
I mean, in the abstract, it can be an opportunity in some areas, particularly in the defence policy area, where the UK has always been quite obstructive. The problem is, and again, particularly in the defence area, that the UK has brought so many capabilities to European security, which will now be, in formal terms at least, in institutional terms, lost to the EU. So, you know, if one looks at an operation like Atalanta, the anti-piracy operation, for which the UK provided the operational headquarters and the commander, or you look at some of the planning work that the UK has done in various CSDP operations, those are things that will be lost. So the EU will be freer to make its own policy in certain areas, but it will have fewer capabilities to execute it.
In this work package, we investigate the broad issue of migration, the movement of third country nationals inside the European Union, that is, nationals of other countries than the members of the European Union who move to the European Union or circulate between the member countries of the European Union. And we try to understand how member states of the European Union have developed cooperation over those movements. So how they have decided to manage the flows of asylum seekers coming to the European Union, how they have decided to remove or not border controls inside the European Union. You have to know that this abolition of border controls inside the European Union is mostly relevant to third country nationals because EU citizens are free to move inside the EU, and controls that member states implemented at their borders were mostly meant to control third country nationals. We investigate also how the European Union has developed relationships with third countries to stabilize migrants or stem the flow of migrants towards Europe. And we also investigate how the Europeans have developed police cooperation to dismantle networks of smugglers of migrants. In this, on this broad topic, we are focused with the rest of the project on what we call differentiation. So differentiation means that the member states of the European Union have developed a very flexible approach to solve those problems. It's not one-size-fits-all method. They have allowed non-EU members to EU members not to participate or to participate, non-EU members sometimes to participate, and they have accepted that different members could apply different rules at different moments. So this is what we call differentiation, and we try to find why the member states have used differentiation in this broad set of issues, and with what effect. Has it worked or not?
Do you consider the new migration pact proposed by the European Commission a possible solution when it comes to migration?
No, because it's a long-term problem, and in various parts of the proposal, the Commission has tried to find the most simple solution and the most immediate solution, and it's unlikely to work. If this is something that will take time. It will take years and decades probably. So one aspect of the problem is that, for instance, EU member states have different asylum laws, and they treat asylum seekers differently. So this can play a role in explaining why it's harder to manage the flow of asylum seekers inside the EU. But before member states apply the same asylum regulations, it will take time. And the proposal of the Commission has been only to maintain this heterogeneity, these different asylum regulations among member states, but just make sure that no member state is overburdened by relocating some asylum seekers to member states who face fewer applications. But this, the member states who are going to receive asylum seekers don't like it. For instance, Hungary, Poland, or the Czech Republic. And there is little rationale also to send asylum seekers to those countries. So at some point, it should be that some member states should be ready to unify the asylum regulation, so that once an asylum seeker has received the status of refugee, then he or she can move between the territories of the member state. But this will be done little by little. An option that we recommend in the work package is that let's allow those member states who are ready to unify their asylum regulations to do it. This is again differentiation because it's a flexible arrangement. But the proposal of the Commission mainly to relocate asylum seekers from one country to another creates a lot of problems inside the EU and is not a long-term solution.